Welcome to PR Talk, sponsored by the PRSA of Oregon and part of the MPN, the Marketing Podcast Network. This is your host, Amy Rosenberg, founder of Veracity and author of A Modern Guide to Public Relations. Help other people find our podcast by subscribing, rating, giving us a review, or sharing on social media. Hi, everybody. We have Jessica Rhodes here, who is the founder of Interview Connections, which focuses on podcasting. Hi, Jessica.
Hi. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, thank you. So first, just tell us about, Interview Connections and the podcasting focus that you have.
Yeah. So Interview Connections is a leading podcast booking agency and coaching company. When I started the company in 2013, there were no other companies or agencies or firms booking entrepreneurs on podcasts. So I saw a real need in the marketplace for business owners to have a service that connects them with interviews on podcasts because it's just such an accessible and easy way for them to get visibility to their target audience. So started it in 2013. We now have over 20 full-time employees working for us that gets our over 200 clients booked for podcast interviews.
Oh, wow. So let's just kind of back up. So in 2013, you saw something in podcasting. And I don't remember, was podcasting even a thing then? And when did podcasting come on the scene?
We were definitely in the early stages. I think podcasting came on the scene probably before 2008. And that was the very early days. But the listenership went up and down until 2013. The percentage of the population that listens to podcasts has increased every single year since 2013. So it was like a really, really good time in the podcast industry. People were really getting into it. And, my story is I started out as a virtual assistant because I wanted to have a home-based business because I was a new mom. And my dad, who's a business coach, had already been podcasting since 2012. And he said, why don't you book me on podcasts? It's a great way for me to get visibility without having to travel. So that was my entry point into podcasting, was having my dad say, book me on podcasts. So, I went to good old Google and Apple Podcasts and just started figuring this out, created, let's create a podcast one sheet. So like a media kit just for what podcasters need. So that was just kind of what it looked like back in the early days. I mean, people were using Blog Talk Radio. So like internet radio was a big thing back then, which was very similar to podcasts. But now people just pretty much do podcasts, not internet radio.
Mm-hmm. And so I assume the listenership for podcasts has grown and evolved. So can you talk about that? And let me just give a side note. Mm-hmm. I literally did have and I kind of understand this actually. I went on a whole campaign with booking a client on some podcasts, right? And not one a client, I mean like 5 leaders within the client. So it was a big deal. And kind of doing different areas. And when I say I mean my staff. And so we're kind of like, oh, okay, this leader can talk about X, so she can go on like this type of podcast and another one, blah, blah, blah. You get the picture.
Yep.
So the top leader of the company literally says, why are we doing all of these podcasts? And I was like, okay, I need to go back to the strategy document. Like I can't. Okay. And the leader actually said, who listens to podcasts? And I get it. I get that approach, but my thought is I always just say I listen to it when I'm driving, cleaning, doing the dishes, or walking. So like there is time. And so I had to go back to the strategy doc, go do that whole thing. And then it's like, okay, any changes or questions? Nope. We all have to remember. So maybe just sell us on.
Yes. Okay. Thank you. This is my jam here because especially in PR, there is of course the question that your client asks, why are we doing this? Who listens to podcasts? Let me tell you who listens to podcasts. Highly educated, high income people. Those are people that listen to podcasts. And for like the exact stats and data, Edison Research comes out with a podcast consumer report. So you can see, what is the income level, the education level, the percentage of the population that listens to podcasts. So a lot of people listen to podcasts and they're so targeted. And here's the strategy, the most effective aspect of the strategy that we always teach our clients that I'm excited to talk to you about and to your listeners, podcasting is a networking strategy. So yes, you are getting visibility to a very targeted group of listeners. 100% that is what's happening. But the way that you can get really great business opportunities from podcasting, podcast guesting, and being interviewed is through networking with podcast hosts. So when we're booking our clients on podcasts, we're looking for shows that, of course, are in their target market, that their topics and expertise is going to be aligned with that show, shows where the listeners are ideal clients and, ideal followers for the client. And we're looking at who is the host of the podcast. Is the host a potential client? So if we're booking a CEO on a podcast and the decision maker for what they're selling is an HR director, I want to see if there are HR directors who are hosting their own podcast and then book them on those shows, because now they've got a 30, 45-minute one-on-one conversation with somebody who could potentially become their client or refer business to them.
Okay. So it's a sales tool, essentially.
Totally.
And it's okay. And so we don't always need to look at visibility aspects.
Yeah, you don't need to look at, in fact, the number of downloads that a podcast has, how big an audience is. There are some platforms that are coming up with their own ways to rank, but that is typically a trap for you to leave shows on the table that would actually be a really good fit, because podcasts that have delivered really great results for our clients are sometimes the smaller shows. They're sometimes the shows that have 100 ideal listeners and ideal clients listening, maybe 5 reviews, but the host is, they own a 7-figure business and they started this podcast to market their business. So it's not a huge podcast, but it is a platform that can deliver results like financial ROI for the client. So that's something that I've been talking about for, my entirety in this industry is podcasts are the one place in the whole PR media strategy where the size of the audience should not be the biggest factor. And it really shouldn't be a deal breaker, because if you can get in front of the right audience, the number of people isn't going to hurt your results.
Oh my God, I love that. And especially in this PR industry, we always have these talks about how do we figure out our ROI. And so with podcasts, it could be kind of direct, where the client would need to inform you that the host gave you a couple of leads or somebody came through from the podcast. And do you have a system for capturing that data?
Yes. So having one thing that we coach our clients on that I recommend, doing with your clients and for anyone listening who's out there getting on podcasts, really make sure you have an effective call to action at the end of a podcast interview, because a mistake a lot of people make when they're getting interviewed, they're like, okay, I'm here for visibility. I need media exposure. Here's my website. Here's all the places you can find me. Like, they want to get everything they have online in front of as many people as possible. But a confused mind says no. People hear that and they're like, okay, cool. Like, maybe I'll find them sometime, somewhere. Whereas with podcasts, because you have a really captive audience, a really targeted audience, you want to give a call to action that gets as many listeners as possible into your ecosystem, onto your email list. So if you know that a free discovery session is the way to get people close to buying from you, then you want the call to action at the end of a podcast interview to be, go to this landing page with an easy to remember URL and fill out this form. You'll get a free copy of my book and a discovery session where you'll have a breakthrough and XYZ. So obviously, depending on what the business is and what the person will get out of having that discovery session, it gets listeners who, because when people hear you on a podcast, they'll get to the end of a 30-minute episode and they'll learn about you. They'll get a sense of your energy, your story, what your expertise is. They're pretty close to knowing, is this somebody I want to work with or not? So getting them, let's say they're an 8 out of 10, they now know I'm pretty interested in working with you. That 20% is the call to action that's going to get them on a call with you or get them onto your email list, where then you can effectively nurture them. So having a call to action that gets them into the buyer's journey is really, really important with the podcast strategy.
Okay. And I love that. And then, so I assume in your call to action is then somehow you're getting them in the buyer's journey, but you're somehow tracking along the way. Like that's the thing. I have a hard time, or we all in PR have a hard time tracking where the sales come from. And so I guess you'd be kind of relying on the client somehow to be able to put some kind of tag or tracking system on that, whatever the call to action is.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's something that I talk to my clients about, is that the podcasts are typically getting you visibility to people for the first time. And usually people aren't buying from you after their first touch point with you. So, we'll have clients that sign up with us at Interview Connections where I'm like, where did you hear about us? They're like, I don't know. I've been seeing you on a bunch of different podcasts. Like, there's no way they could remember like the first place they found us. And then after they hear about us for the first time, they're maybe seeing our ads, they're listening to our podcast. Like, there's so many multiple touch points. So I always like to remind business owners of that, because when a business owner invests in PR, when they invest in visibility, they're like, I want to see the direct ROI. And they have to remember that when you're growing a business, people are going to buy from you after multiple touch points from multiple mediums. So it's very important that they have an effective sales and marketing team that is taking in leads and then effectively nurturing them through other strategies. So, I have a client who gets a lot of leads and clients through just LinkedIn cold outreach. So I said, well, take your podcast interviews and send them to people that you're DMing and that you're doing, cold outreach to, because that will help shorten the sales cycle. So he can get a financial return on investment from his podcast interviews by leveraging those interviews in other marketing strategies that he's executing for his business.
Okay. So kind of moving on to the PR kind of tactical side, can you talk about how booking podcasts is different than other types of media and how
absolutely.
to go about it?
When you are pitching and booking interviews on podcasts, you are reaching out to a host who owns that show. This is their creative outlet. This is their baby. They care a lot about it. Those listeners are their community. That is their tribe. And so when you reach out to a podcast host, you have to really communicate that you get that if you're pitching yourself or you're pitching your client, that the person you are pitching is a really genuinely good match for them and their show. Because podcasters get pitched so often, they know that people want their audience, right? They have so many people that are reaching out, like wanting visibility to their audience, that it's really important when you're pitching that you communicate that either directly or through the quality of your suggestion, that you get that their time is valuable. You understand what they're looking for. You understand who their audience is. So just to kind of give you an example, and we've been pitching and booking interviews for 9 years, and there are a variety of types of pitches that work. So there's not one template. We have some of our top performing booking agents are getting a lot of interviews with like a 2-sentence pitch, like really, really short. So, but generally what you want to touch on when you're reaching out to a host for the first time is you want to communicate that you know who they are and who their show is. I got pitched 2 days ago for somebody that wants to be on my podcast, and they didn't even have the right name of my podcast. Like, my podcast is called Monetize the Mic. And they're like, I'd love to book my client on podcast guesting podcast. I'm like, that's not what my show is called. So you're out. Take a beat, because you don't want to copy and paste and send the same pitch to every single show. Yeah, you'll meet your quantity metrics of like, oh, I pitched 100 podcasts today. But if it's the same template, copy and paste pitch, people can just sense that you didn't take the time. So you can have a template of essentially what you're pitching your client as an expert in, but tweak it a little bit, personalize it. If you listen to their podcast, tell them what episode, what did you like about it? If you didn't listen to it, don't tell them you did. A lot of people will lie. They're like, oh, I listened to your podcast. I love it. It's like, no, you didn't. I can tell you're lying. So, tell the truth. And then I like to communicate, hey, I know that your audience is made up of business owners who want to learn about PR. This is why my client would be a great fit, because she, teaches entrepreneurs how to use podcasts in their PR. Like, connect the dots. Some people will just say, here's my client, here's their bio. Do you want to interview them? And I'm like, well, don't make me do the work of figuring out why it's a fit. Like, tell me how this is applicable to my audience. And also do a little bit of research in who the host is. Learn what their business is, what they do. I always am so amused when people pitch me and they don't take that extra step to learn that I own a podcast booking agency. Like, you know, I kind of have that topic covered. So, you know, just do a little bit of research. And at the end of the day, it's like the way to effectively pitch and book on podcasts is to just talk to the hosts like humans. Just be honest, take the time to learn a little bit about them and genuinely communicate why you believe you or your client is a good match. And then follow up. You know, most hosts don't respond to the pitch after the first outreach. They're saving all their pitches to go through once a week if they're getting a lot. I always recommend connecting with and, you know, reaching out to hosts on LinkedIn or whatever social media platform they're most active on, and, you know, reaching out and saying, hey, I have somebody that I think would be a really great guest for your show. Are you open to suggestions? Where can I send an email? Who can I reach out to? Because then they might say, oh, reach out to my assistant. She goes through all the pitches. And then good, you're getting it to the right person rather than just sending it to them and then never hearing back.
Okay. So there's a lot here. So a lot of little questions. So something really simple is when you say follow up, so how many times? Okay. So yeah, we'll do a little social stalking. That's fine. But how many times should we follow up on email? What do you have kind of a rule? I mean, I would say 2 to 4. My booking agent team probably tracks that. I know that they track this and probably are changing it as they see what's effective. But I would say 2 to 4. And if you're using something like we use HubSpot, and I can see if somebody opened the email, right? So if they opened the email but they didn't respond, you know, maybe you want to go to LinkedIn or social media. So you want to be strategic about it and use tools. Like another cool tool that we use is called Boomerang. You know, you can send an email and then have the email boomerang back into your inbox in 2 days if nobody replied to it or nobody opened the email. So there's lots of cool little tools that you can use, but 2 to 4 times. You just kind of have to use your instincts. And then let's see. So what about the idea? When I was listening to you, okay, I was thinking less is more is kind of what you're saying. Like maybe we don't need to. So, okay, the reason why these mistakes are occurring, why they have the wrong name in the pitch to you is because they're pitching too many things, right? And they can't take the time to review everything because we're human, not computers. And so is it something like less is more possibly? But then I honestly, I am a little then kind of thinking, well, you did say something about meeting a quota of sending 100 pitches out. So then I'm thinking, well, maybe that's
just an example. We, you know, in our company, we don't have a quota for pitches, but for some people, like if when I got that pitch that had like the wrong name of my podcast, that was a virtual assistant who was pitching their client, you know, so they might be thinking, oh, I just need to get it out to as many people as possible. And hey, you know, I've made that mistake with other things that I do. I work too fast and I make a typo and I'm like, ah, crap, I was working too fast. I know better. So, you know, that stuff happens, but I just always like to share that because it's a good reminder. Just slow down a little bit. Quality is good. And I do think less is more. I do think a really short, pithy, like concise pitch is going to open the door to a response, a conversation, than a long email. And just remembering that not everyone really responds to a ton of text. Like if I get a really long email, I'm just going to mark it as unread or I'll just won't respond because I need to talk things out. I like short messages. So just know that every host you're reaching out to is a different human who may take in information differently than the last person that you reached out to.
Yeah. And if you're getting the right bookings, then maybe 5 quality bookings creating 5 quality leads is better than 75 junky bookings, I guess. Because that's the other thing. There's a lot of podcasts out there. And so so a typical question I would ask is, how do you vet the podcast? But it sounds like, well, we don't need to look at listenership so much, which is great because that's hard to find. So it's more about what is the B2B type connection, or what could the sales connection type.
Yeah. The monetization possibility is typically one of the first things that I'm considering. Like, is this, and of course there's some clients that are just like, they go for quantity. They're like, they purely just want to be anywhere and everywhere. I've worked with clients like that. Like their strategy and what they want is to be on as many podcasts as possible. And they'll talk about literally any topic. Okay, cool. Like we'll get you everywhere. But for most business owners that are investing in an agency to get them booked on podcasts, they want to make sure that their time is well spent. They don't have 40 hours a week just to be on podcasts. They maybe have an hour a week or less to be on podcasts. So going on the shows that are going to be the fastest path to leads and clients reaching out to them is really, really key.
As a business owner, how do you focus? So it sounds like you just work on podcasts, but are you ever kind of tempted to, I bet you have some clients saying, oh, well, now can you get me on TV? Or now can you do this, that, and the other? How do you stay true to what you actually
that's a great question. And we have had that question. I think the most common ask is like, can you book me for speaking engagements? It's so similar. And I mean, I'm sure you know too, like when you do, bookings, when you're getting people connected and booked for opportunities, one of the biggest values that you offer to your clients is the relationships you have. We have relationships. We have so many hosts that already know, like, and trust us. I don't have relationships with speaking opportunities. I don't have relationships in TV. So for me, that would be like starting at square one again. And I don't really want to do that. So what we've done as we've diversified our revenue streams and expanded, we've just leaned a lot more into the coaching and mentoring and teaching people the strategy. So rather than expand out into other services where we're booking on other platforms, we've expanded our services to include, we're going to coach you and mentor you on how to use podcasting to grow your business. We're going to help you with your call to action. We're going to help you with your messaging. We've got business coaching offers as well. So we've added more coaching and mentoring to our business and our services. So that's how we've diversified. So podcast guesting and all of that is still at the core, but rather than adding in other very labor intensive like pitching and booking services, we've added in the coaching and mentoring side and also the networking, because we have a really great client network. So we host networking calls for our clients, and we're hosting our first in-person meetup. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. So then you must think that podcasting is here to stay, she says with 100%.
Yeah. I mean, 9 years in and it just continues to go up and up. So I definitely feel like it's here to stay. And I mean, just seeing how much money is being invested into podcasting, how many celebrities and huge companies are investing into podcasting, I know it's here to stay.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so one last detailed question, and then I want to move back to talk about your experience as a VA. But okay, so when you were talking about some people just wanting to get on all the podcasts, do they ever have the reason of just trying to increase their SEO, and they think that getting on podcasts will increase their search engine marketing? Or
yep, absolutely, yes.
And do you agree with
I
that?
do. And it just depends. Typically the clients that we've worked with who want to get on like 50 shows a month, like that's all they want to do. They're incredibly wealthy. Like they are not worried about an ROI because they have so much money from like investing and things like that. So their play is massive visibility. Whereas most business owners and most clients that we have, they're running businesses 6-7 figures and they're still growing. Like they need leads and clients. Like they're not set for life financially. So they can't afford to just do podcasts all day, every day. So that's the difference there. But yes, it is good for search engine optimization. And that's a strategy I do try to teach business owners, is that when you go on podcasts, you're getting a backlink to your website on a podcaster's, website that's going to help get you seen in Google. So when someone's Googling your name, they're going to see not just your website, but all these podcast interviews that you've done on other people's shows. A lot of podcasters are putting their interviews up on YouTube, so YouTube videos are now being shown in a specific spot of the Google search results, which is really good.
Mm-hmm. Okay, wait. One last detailed question, and then the VA. Okay, so I'm a podcaster. Okay, so obviously. So what do you think? And honestly, I'm not going to change what I'm doing, but I still just want to know, what do you think of the fact that I just do voice only? Because you just mentioned YouTube?
I mean, I think it's totally fine. I'm an old-fashioned podcaster where I appreciate the audio only. Like most of the interviews I do, I'm here on video. So when you said, "Oh, this is audio only," I was like, "Okay, cool. I don't have to turn my light on and get blinded for 30 minutes." Like I can just focus on the audio. And you can still put your podcast on YouTube just with the cover image. So we put our audio only podcast on YouTube. You just can't see us talking. I do like the video aspect because it just gives me more content that I can repurpose. Like I'll take a 2-minute clip from the video recording of our podcast and then use that on social media. So personally, I like it, but if you want to do audio only, do audio only.
Yeah. Well, the only reason is because I have concentration issues. And a lot of people do. And a lot of writers, so I work with a lot of writers. So we can't just like sit and make eye contact with you when we're interviewing you and trying to take notes so that we can then create a story. So, I mean, all of these video calls are just, some of us are pushing back now.
Well, and I just want to say, I really like that. And in fact, in our, I lead our sales team at Interview Connections. And we were actually saying how some of our best sales calls were ones that we weren't able to use Zoom. And it just ended up being on the phone, and how it was great because we could walk around. We didn't have to worry about what we looked like or the eye contact. So I'm with you on the audio only. I like it.
Yeah, it's just kind of more natural in a way because, and the eye contact, it throws you off. It makes you more thinking about what you look like. Whereas when it's audio only, I can just think about you and what you're saying. And it's also imperative in PR that I listen to my clients. Yes. Right. And so, so if I'm thinking about me, it's just, it gets in the way. So, I'm just very fascinated that you started as a VA and then you created a business. So can you just tell us, I mean, you kind of mentioned how that happened, but just maybe a little bit about your background and then what do you think about other people working with VAs for podcasts? Well, I don't want to say podcast booking because you guys are the ultimate podcast bookers.
So I started, my background, I started this company when I was 25, and for 6 years, before that, I did door-to-door canvassing for a nonprofit. So I went right from door-to-door canvassing to being a virtual assistant to be home with my baby, who's now 9 years old. And it was great. I think virtual assistants are a really great team option for a business owner who doesn't want or isn't ready for full-time W-2 employees. So I have nothing against VAs. It was such a great way for me personally to get started as an entrepreneur because it was very simple for me to say, okay, I'll be a VA and sole proprietor, not a big deal. And then, starting the actual S corporation and all of that was like a big thing, but it was sort of like the gateway into me creating a real business. And then, in terms of people using a VA, I think it's really fine. Not everyone can afford a booking agency, afford a PR firm. And I think that this podcasting is such a great strategy. So whatever support you can get to get started in it is really good. As I always do, make sure that you have, when you're investing in someone representing you, that is a big deal. And I get sad when VAs send really poorly written pitches because it's not representative of them. I mean, it is, but it's representative of their client. And that client, whether maybe they're saving some money by working with a virtual assistant who's not that expensive, but it's damaging their reputation. So it's fine to work with VAs. Just do your due diligence, do some quality assurance to make sure that you are still being represented well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And probably keep your eye on the details in terms of getting everything scheduled appropriately because, not showing up for an interview could be a problem too. And so, PR is very detail oriented. And I think people that don't know that are very surprised to learn that. So anyway, well, thank you. We really appreciate it. This has been fascinating. And, we will keep our eye on your business for sure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, and where can people find you?
interviewconnections.com. So all the information about our business and our blog, our podcast is all there. So interviewconnections.com.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jessica.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. For more PR insight, be sure to check out Amy's book, A Modern Guide to Public Relations, at prtalk.co. Also, please subscribe, rate, or leave us a review.